Why Colby Covington is about to silence the doubters.
Here is the former UFC interim welterweight champion, Colby "Chaos" Covington.
Colby Covington is the real deal.
Joaquin Buckley.
Colby Covington vs. Joaquin Buckley is coming up this weekend at UFC Tampa. And although Colby Covington is coming off a really bad performance against Leon Edwards, I'm here to tell you that he's about to get right back on track vs. Joaquin Buckley. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm JuicyMMA. I make opinionative MMA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it. Ever since joining the UFC, Colby Covington has looked extremely impressive. Not only was he able to beat some really good fighters like Rafael dos Anjos, like Robbie Lawler, Jorge Masvidal, Tyron Woodley, and others, but he was also able to do so in very impressive fashion, as he was able to dominate and really break a lot of those guys. And after going on a long win streak, he ended up getting a couple of title shots against Kamaru Usman. And although both of those fights didn't go Colby's way, as in the first fight he ended up getting finished in the 5th round, where it was 2-2 going into that round, and in the second fight he ended up losing via decision, which probably was an even closer fight where a lot of people, including myself, thought it probably should have been a draw. At the end of the day, it was pretty clear that Colby Covington at the time was the only guy that was able to potentially beat Kamaru Usman, as Usman was essentially finishing or dominating everybody else in that division. But after losing to Usman the second time, Colby got a little bit lucky, as he ended up beating Jorge Masvidal in dominant fashion, and Leon Edwards ended up getting a crazy head kick knockout on Kamaru Usman and beat Usman again in their rematch. And at that point, it was pretty clear that Colby was gonna get the next shot versus Leon Edwards. And at the time, a lot of people, including myself, thought Colby would have a relatively easy time with Leon. Leon has shown the lack of ability to stop takedowns against Kamaru Usman in their second fight and their first fight, and I just thought that was a real opportunity for Colby to exploit. I thought Colby would be able to get takedown after takedown on Leon, but obviously, as it turned out, that wasn't the case whatsoever, as Colby ended up having his worst performance really of his entire career. And he says that bad performance was due to a broken foot. A lot of other people say that bad performance was due to age and due to him being washed, but at the end of the day, no one really knows the truth until we see his next fight against Joaquin Buckley. But before we get into my opinion on whether Colby is washed or not, let's quickly take a look at his game to see what he does well out there and to see why he was able to be so successful throughout his UFC career thus far. Well, when you look at Colby Covington, it's pretty clear that he does one thing extraordinarily well, and that's wrestling. Colby does a great job at constantly shooting in for takedowns, and if he doesn't get the first takedown and he doesn't get the second takedown, he's probably going to get the third. He does a great job at chain wrestling, tiring out his opponents, and eventually he's going to find that takedown. And that relentless style that Colby has really breaks a lot of guys. It tires them out, makes it easier for Colby to get takedowns as the fight goes longer, and potentially allows Colby to be able to find finishes on the ground via submission, via TKO finishes, or even on the feet at times when his opponent is extraordinarily tired. And the Jorge Masvidal fight is a perfect example of what Colby does well. Colby was able to constantly shoot shot after shot, and at the beginning of the fight, Masvidal was doing a relatively good job at stopping takedowns, but as the fight went longer and longer, the takedowns became easier and easier to get for Colby, and Colby just started to dominate more and more, and at the end of the fight, he ended up winning 50-45 or even 50-44 on some scorecards. But outside of Colby's relentless wrestling ability, he also has a decent ability to strike. Obviously, he's not a good striker at this point, and he's never been a good striker, but at the end of the day, he certainly is improving and getting better. On the feet, Colby has a decent ability to throw a jab and a left straight. At times, he can throw nice uppercuts, as he did rock Kamaru Usman with a nice uppercut in their second fight, while also having the ability to throw hooks as well. But at the end of the day, what Colby mostly does out there on the feet is throw jabs, throw an occasional left straight, and throw kicks to the legs, body, and head. But outside of Colby's wrestling ability, his striking ability, he also has tremendous cardio, as I mentioned, and he's able to pace essentially all of his opponents, while also at the same time proving to have a really good chin throughout his career. But now, let's get into the next question that some of you may be wondering, and that question is Colby Covington washed? Well, obviously this is a very tricky question, because in most of his fights, Colby Covington has looked extraordinarily well. Honestly, all of his fights outside of his last performance versus Leon. But of course, as I just mentioned, he did have a really bad performance against Leon, and he is 36 years old at this point and hasn't fought in quite a long time as well. So of course, a lot of people are going to think that Colby is probably washed at this point, but if I have to give my prediction on whether or not Colby is washed at this point, I would probably say no. Just due to the fact that I do think there is some validity to his foot breaking in that Leon fight. If Colby actually did break his foot in that fight, obviously it's going to hinder a lot of what he does well. As I mentioned before, Colby's game is centered around his pressure, him shooting shot after shot, while also showing some movement on the feet as well. And if Colby's foot was broken in that fight against Leon, he would literally be able to do none of those things. And that would certainly explain why in that fight, Colby was the one getting pressured basically the entire fight, and he didn't shoot a takedown essentially the entire fight until the 5th round. So in my opinion, if I had to say at this point, although there is a lot going against Colby with him being 36, with him having a really bad performance, and him also not fighting in quite a long time, it's going to be around a year at this point, I do still think Colby Covington is going to look pretty good out there and is going to be able to beat a lot of guys in the division. I don't necessarily think he's at his peak at this point, I think that's pretty clear, but at the end of the day, I do think he's going to beat a lot of guys, and I do think he has the chance and still the capability to be a top 5, top 6 fighter in the welterweight division. But now, let's break down this fight between Colby Covington and Joaquin Buckley, and let's get into my prediction. Now, when you look at a guy in Joaquin Buckley, it's pretty clear that this guy is a young up-and-comer that has made significant improvements and is currently on a pretty decent win streak. As earlier on, when you looked at Buckley's career, I didn't necessarily love his game. I thought he was a guy that did have a lot of power, that did have an ability to wrestle at times, but on the feet, it kind of just seemed like he was just throwing whatever he possibly could out there on the feet just to see what could potentially land. But as his career has progressed, I do think he's done a tremendous job at tightening some things up, getting a little bit better on the feet, utilizing his wrestling a lot more effectively. And at this point, I do think Buckley is a pretty good fighter in the welterweight division, as his most recent performance is coming off a win over Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. But at the end of the day, in this matchup against Colby Covington, I do think it's going to be a difficult one for Buckley. Early in the fight, I do think there's a real possibility that Buckley does have some success, as Colby a lot of times likes to start off a little bit slower just to feel out his opponent's power and to find a good opportunity to shoot in for a takedown. But as a fight does progress in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds, I do think Colby's going to start implementing his takedowns, start to tire out Buckley as the fight does progress. Maybe in the 2nd round, it would be a little bit difficult for Colby to get takedowns, but as the fight does progress, I think it's going to get easier and easier. And by the end of the fight, I think we're going to be looking at a very tired Joaquin Buckley and a very fresh Colby Covington, where Colby would end up getting a decision victory over Joaquin Buckley. Now, obviously, as I said, Buckley is good and getting better. He definitely does have a lot of power and has the potential to knock out Colby Covington. But at this point, if I had to give an official prediction, I would say I think Colby Covington is going to win this matchup via decision. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening in this fight. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Colby Covington is going to get his career back on track and beat Joaquin Buckley, or do you think Buckley is going to win? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out, guys.